My name is Gloria, and I am 66 years old. As a retired anthropologist, I dedicated my career to understanding, appreciating, and bridging diverse human cultures across the globe. For 40 years, I balanced demanding research in remote villages and bustling cities with the joy of raising my son Andrew, carefully instilling in him a deep appreciation for the beautiful diversity of our human family. I meticulously planned our annual family gatherings, hoping to create harmonious, unifying experiences for everyone, celebrating the shared humanity that connects us all regardless of our backgrounds or origins. Then, at our most recent annual gathering, Andrew brought his new girlfriend Maria, a kind and intelligent immigrant with the most gentle soul I had ever encountered. The moment she walked through my door, Lisa, my daughter-in-law, launched an attack that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. "Your accent is so thick, I can barely understand you," she screamed, her face contorted with disgust. "What is that awful smell you foreigners always try to take over everything with your weird food and customs?" Andrew stood frozen, saying nothing. My grandson Ethan publicly scoffed with cruel teenage arrogance. "Her culture is so primitive, Grandma. Why do we have to deal with this?" My lifelong dedication to cultural understanding, my deepest values, my faith in my family's capacity for love, all of it was being tragically undermined and attacked by the most blatant bigotry I had ever witnessed. I felt profoundly disrespected, culturally invalidated, and utterly helpless, watching my own flesh and blood reveal themselves as strangers. Yet, as despair threatened to consume me entirely, something deep within my anthropologist's soul began to stir. My 4 decades of studying prejudice and successful cultural integration had taught me that ignorance can be conquered, but only when confronted with undeniable truth. What Lisa, Andrew, Ethan, and even sweet Chloe didn't know was my secret weapon extensive field notes and journals documenting cultural misunderstandings and the proven strategies that heal them. More importantly, my discreet voice recorder had captured every venomous word of Lisa's bigoted attack, every cruel laugh from my grandchildren, and Andrew's devastating silence in the face of hatred. My network of diversity consultants and a skilled family therapist were waiting in the wings. This time, their insidious bigotry wouldn't just unravel. It would be exposed, confronted, and transformed, proving that cultural appreciation and human decency always triumph over prejudice, no matter how deeply rooted the hatred might seem. 3 days after the disastrous family gathering that had left my heart in pieces, I gathered every ounce of courage I possessed and drove to Andrew and Lisa's beautiful suburban home. The house I had helped them buy, where I had spent countless holidays creating warm memories, now felt like foreign territory as I knocked on the door that had always been open to me. Andrew answered, his face pale and uncomfortable, unable to meet my eyes directly. "Hi, Mom," he mumbled, stepping aside reluctantly to let me in. "Lisa's in the living room." I found Lisa exactly where I expected her to be, sitting on the cream-colored sofa with her arms crossed, her expression set in the same mask of righteous anger she had worn during her attack on Maria. There was no shame in her eyes, no recognition that she had done anything wrong. If anything, she looked even more defiant than she had 3 days earlier. "Lisa." I began gently settling into the chair across from her, my voice carrying all the diplomatic skill I had learned in decades of navigating cultural conflicts. "I've come to talk about what happened at the gathering. I think there may have been some misunderstandings that we can work through together." Her response was immediate and devastating. "Misunderstandings." She spat, her voice rising to the same shrill pitch that had echoed through my dining room. There was no misunderstanding Gloria, that woman that Maria. She comes into our family home with her thick accent that nobody can understand, bringing those weird smells and strange food, trying to push her foreign ways on us like we're supposed to just accept everything. Andrew shifted uncomfortably beside her, his hands fidgeting with his coffee cup, but he said nothing to stop her escalating tirade. You immigrants always do this. Lisa continued, her face flushing red with anger. You act all sweet and innocent, but really, you're trying to take over our traditions, our way of life. What kind of low-class foreigner thinks she can just waltz into a respectable American family and change everything? The word immigrants hit me like a physical blow. Lisa knew perfectly well that I was born in Ohio, that my family had been in America for 3 generations. But in her rage, she was lumping me together with Maria, as if my appreciation for other cultures somehow made me foreign suspect other. Lisa, please, I whispered, feeling tears begin to form in my eyes. You're talking about the woman Andrew loves. She's kind, intelligent, educated. She has a master's degree in literature. She volunteers at the Children's Hospital. How can you say such hateful things about someone you barely know? But Lisa was beyond reason, beyond compassion. Oh, please, Gloria. She laughed bitterly. You're so naive, it's pathetic. She's probably just here for Andrew's money, like all the rest of them. And you're too old and too liberal to see what's really happening. This is an insult to our family, to everything decent and American. It was then that Andrew finally spoke, but his words offered no comfort, no support, no recognition of the pain I was experiencing. Mom, he said quietly, still avoiding my eyes, maybe you're overreacting a little. Lisa's just concerned about family traditions and cultural boundaries. It's not personal. Not personal. My son had just characterized his wife's vicious attack on an innocent woman as not personal, as if Maria's humanity didn't matter, as if my life's work understanding and celebrating human diversity was just an academic exercise with no real meaning. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from my grandson, Ethan. The words on the screen made my hands shake. Grandma, why do we have to deal with her weird culture at family stuff? It's so embarrassing. She's probably just using Dad for money, like you said. You're being an old fool if you can't see that. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. This was the boy I had taught to appreciate different foods, different music, different ways of seeing the world. The child who had once listened with wide-eyed wonder as I told him stories about fascinating cultures from around the globe had somehow transformed into someone who could dismiss an entire human being with such callous indifference. Minutes later, another text arrived, this one from Chloe. Yeah, Grandma, her culture is so primitive. Like, why can't she just be normal? You're way too nice to people who don't deserve it. I stared at these messages from my beloved grandchildren, feeling something fundamental break inside my chest. These weren't just thoughtless teenage comments. These were carefully crafted expressions of genuine contempt, taught and reinforced by adults who should have known better. I see the kids are texting you, Lisa said with satisfaction, having obviously orchestrated their participation in this coordinated attack. Even they can see what you're too stubborn to admit. Maria doesn't belong in this family, and your continued support of her is bringing shame on all of us. In the days that followed, the campaign against both Maria and me intensified with calculated precision. Lisa and Andrew made it clear that any further contact between Maria and me would be seen as a betrayal of family loyalty. They began declining my calls, canceling our usual Sunday dinners, and creating a social barrier that felt as solid as a brick wall. "Mom, you need to understand," Andrew told me during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. "This isn't about prejudice or hatred. It's about protecting our family's reputation and maintaining appropriate boundaries. Your continued association with Maria is causing problems for all of us." The word association stung almost as much as Lisa's direct insults. My son was reducing my friendship with a wonderful woman to a political liability, something to be managed and controlled rather than celebrated and nurtured. Lisa began spreading carefully crafted rumors throughout their social circle and our extended family. She told anyone who would listen that Maria had been aggressive and disrespectful during the family gathering, that I was too old and too liberal to see through her manipulative behavior, and that the entire situation was causing unnecessary drama that was tearing the family apart. The isolation was swift and devastating. Family friends who had known me for decades began treating me with awkward politeness, clearly uncomfortable with what they had been told about my supposed poor judgment and declining mental faculties. The woman who had spent her career building bridges between cultures was suddenly being portrayed as someone who couldn't recognize a threat to her own family's well-being. As I sat alone in my house that evening, surrounded by the artifacts and photographs from 40 years of anthropological work, I felt the full weight of what was happening. My family wasn't just rejecting Maria because of her background. They were rejecting everything I had ever stood for, everything I had tried to teach them about the beauty and value of human diversity. The pain was almost unbearable, but beneath it, something else was beginning to grow. A cold, determined anger that reminded me of every fight I had ever fought against ignorance and prejudice in my professional life. This time, the battlefield was my own family, but the principles at stake were exactly the same. I reached for my voice recorder and played back the audio from that devastating family gathering. Lisa's venomous words filled my quiet living room, each cruel phrase a piece of evidence that would prove beyond any doubt who was really bringing shame to our family. The campaign of erasure that Lisa and Andrew launched against both Maria and me intensified with each passing week, growing more sophisticated and cruel as they realized I wasn't going to simply accept their bigoted demands and fade quietly into the background of their newly purified family life. Lisa recruited her best friend Brenda into the effort, and together they began a systematic character assassination that was as calculated as it was devastating. Brenda, who had always been sweet to my face during family gatherings, now openly discussed Lisa's struggles with difficult in-laws at their weekly coffee gatherings, painting me as an aging academic whose liberal ideals had made me blind to obvious threats to family stability. It's really sad. I overheard Brenda telling their mutual friend Sarah at the grocery store, her voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times. Gloria just can't accept that not everyone shares her obsession with foreign cultures. She's become so fixated on this Maria person that she's willing to destroy her own family to prove some kind of political point. The narrative they were crafting was insidious in its simplicity. I was a well-meaning but misguided old woman whose academic background had made me naive about real-world dangers, too blinded by multicultural ideology to protect my family from someone who was obviously using Andrew for financial gain. But it was during a moment of accidental eavesdropping that I discovered the truly devastating truth behind their coordinated attack. I had arrived at Andrew's house to drop off some books I thought he might enjoy, and finding the front door unlocked, I let myself in as I had done countless times before. That's when I heard Lisa on the phone in the kitchen, her voice tearful but determined. "Brenda, you don't understand how hard this is for me." She was saying her words, carrying clearly through the quiet house. It's not just about Maria. It's about Mom's whole attitude toward Andrew's past. She keeps bringing up his college years, talking about how much he's grown and changed, like she wants everyone to know he wasn't always perfect. My blood turned cold as I realized what I was hearing. She just can't let go of the past. Lisa continued, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine distress. It's like she wants to ruin the image we've built of Andrew as this perfect husband and father. She needs to accept that Andrew's childhood wasn't always ideal, that there were some rough patches we don't need to revisit. We can't let her keep exposing details about his past that could damage his reputation now. The chilling clarity hit me like a physical blow. Lisa's vicious attack on Maria wasn't really about cultural prejudice, though that hatred was certainly real. It was about fear. Fear that my support for an immigrant woman would somehow connect to my knowledge of Andrew's past struggles with his own prejudices, struggles that they had carefully buried and rewritten to protect their current social standing. Standing in that hallway, listening to my daughter-in-law discuss my son's past as if it were a public relations problem to be managed, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. They weren't just attacking Maria and me out of simple bigotry. They were systematically protecting a fabricated image of their perfect American family, even if it meant destroying relationships with people who had sacrificed everything to build that image in the first place. The memory that Lisa's words triggered was so painful that I had to grip the door frame to keep from collapsing. 25 years ago, when Andrew was a sensitive college sophomore, struggling to find his place in the world, he had fallen in with a group of students who expressed their insecurities through hatred and violence toward anyone who seemed different or foreign. I discovered his involvement purely by accident, finding disturbing pamphlets and meeting notes hidden in his dorm room during a surprise visit. The group was planning to vandalize the campus International Student Center, an attack that would have caused nearly $80,000 in damage and potentially resulted in serious criminal charges for everyone involved. The terror I felt in that moment was indescribable. Not just fear for Andrew's future, but horror at the realization that this beautiful, sensitive boy I had raised to appreciate human diversity had somehow been twisted into someone capable of participating in acts of hatred. I spent 3 sleepless nights crafting a strategy to save him from himself and the consequences of his choices. Using every professional contact I had built over my career, I discreetly identified the group's targets and warned them through indirect channels. I personally paid $50,000 to enhance security at the International Center money I had been saving for my own research sabbatical. Most importantly, I orchestrated a series of coincidental events that made it impossible for the attack to take place as planned. Andrew never knew what I had done. The group simply fell apart when their plans repeatedly failed to materialize, and Andrew, shaken by how close he had come to serious trouble, gradually pulled away from their influence. By his junior year, he had recommitted himself to the values of tolerance and understanding I had tried to teach him, and by the time he graduated, he seemed genuinely transformed. I never told him about my intervention because I didn't want him to carry the guilt of knowing how much his momentary descent into hatred had cost me both financially and emotionally. I wanted him to believe that his transformation was purely his own achievement, his own moral growth and maturation. Now, standing in his house listening to Lisa's fearful phone conversation, I realized with crushing clarity that the cost of my sacrifice had been far higher than I had ever imagined. They weren't just protecting Andrew from the consequences of his past mistakes. They were protecting themselves from any association with the kind of growth and change that might suggest he had ever needed to grow and change in the first place. When I tried to subtly reference Andrew's college years during our next conversation, hoping to remind him of how far he had come and how proud I was of his development, his reaction was swift and brutal. "Mom, stop trying to control my narrative." He snapped, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard since those terrible college days. "You're always bringing up ancient history, trying to make me feel guilty about things that happened decades ago. Just let it go. Lisa's right. You're making everything worse with your need to analyze and discuss every aspect of everyone's past." Lisa, who had been listening from the next room, emerged with tears in her eyes and a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Gloria, it really hurts when you make Andrew sound like he was some kind of terrible person who needed to be fixed. He's a wonderful man now, and dwelling on his college struggles just causes him pain. Please stop. You're destroying his peace with your constant references to the past." The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. They had taken my pride in Andrew's growth and transformation and twisted it into evidence of my cruelty and insensitivity. My love for my son, my joy in his ability to overcome his early mistakes, had been weaponized against both of us. Brenda's social media post that evening was the final knife twist. Some people just can't accept that others have moved beyond their past mistakes. It's really sad when family members insist on dwelling on ancient history for their own emotional gratification. Sometimes love means letting people be who they've become, not who they used to be. The post was carefully crafted to sound supportive of Andrew, while painting me as someone who was selfishly clinging to outdated grievances. Anyone reading it would naturally assume that I was the problem, the family member who couldn't move forward, who insisted on keeping old wounds open for my own psychological needs. The formal proposal that arrived from Mr. Anderson Lisa's lawyer was the final insult. If I publicly apologized for my disruptive behavior and cultural insensitivity, if I agreed to have only supervised contact with Maria and promised to stop discussing Andrew's past growth and development, then Lisa and Andrew would consider allowing me to attend future family gatherings. Reading that letter, I understood with crystalline clarity what they were really asking of me. They wanted me to admit that my life's work was worthless, that my friendship with Maria was inappropriate, and that my pride in Andrew's moral development was actually a form of abuse. They wanted me to erase myself, my values, and my history to protect their carefully constructed image of a family that had never struggled with prejudice or hatred. The choice before me was stark and terrible: surrender everything I believed in and accept a diminished role in a family built on lies, or stand up for the truth and risk losing them entirely. As I sat in my study that night, surrounded by 4 decades of research into human dignity and cultural understanding, I knew there was really no choice at all. Some principles are worth more than peace. Some truths are worth more than family harmony. And some fights, no matter how painful, are worth having, because the alternative is the slow death of everything that makes life meaningful. The war for my family's soul was about to begin, and this time I would not be fighting alone. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered by certified mail with all the cold formality of a legal document designed to intimidate and silence. Mr. Anderson's letterhead gleamed at the top of the page as I read words that I never could have imagined would be directed at me by my own family. Dear Mrs. Gloria Martinez, it began using my full formal name as if I were a stranger rather than the woman who had helped raise the children who were now banishing me. After careful consideration and consultation with our clients, we are formally notifying you that Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Martinez are severing all familial ties with you, effective immediately. The legal language that followed was designed to be as devastating as possible. I was prohibited from any contact with Maria, accused of emotional harassment and cultural insensitivity in my attempts to force unwanted political ideologies on family members. Most chilling of all, they threatened a restraining order if I attempted any further contact with Andrew, Lisa, or my grandchildren. The letter concluded with a paragraph that was clearly meant to destroy any remaining hope I might have harbored. Our clients have made this difficult decision in the best interests of family harmony and the emotional well-being of their minor children who have been negatively impacted by your increasingly erratic and inappropriate behavior. I read those words over and over, each repetition driving the knife deeper into my heart. My own son and daughter-in-law had characterized my love for them, my support for tolerance and understanding as erratic and inappropriate behavior that was harmful to children. The woman who had spent her career fighting prejudice was being legally branded as someone whose very presence was dangerous to her own family. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The anthropologist in me understood that sometimes the most powerful communication happens not through words, but through symbols and shared memories that connect us to our deepest humanity. I spent hours creating a small, intimate photo album filled with precious memories that told the story of our family's journey together. Pictures of Andrew as a little boy, his face bright with curiosity as I showed him artifacts from different cultures. Photos of our family trips to museums and cultural festivals. Andrew and the children eagerly learning about traditions from around the world. Images of Lisa from happier times, smiling beside international exchange students I had brought to our holiday dinners, her face glowing with genuine warmth and interest. I wrote a letter to accompany the album, pouring my heart onto the pages in handwriting that shook with emotion and love. I reminded them of the values we had once shared, the joy we had found in learning about other people and other ways of life. I told them how proud I was of the growth Andrew had shown over the years, how grateful I was for the patience Lisa had once demonstrated when learning about unfamiliar customs and traditions. My dearest Andrew and Lisa, I wrote, I know we're going through a difficult time right now, but I believe in my heart that the love and understanding that brought us together as a family is stronger than the fear and anger that seems to be pulling us apart. These pictures remind me of who we really are when we're at our best, curious, compassionate, open to the beautiful diversity of the human experience. Late one evening, I drove to their house and left the album on their doorstep, hoping that when they saw those captured moments of genuine happiness and connection, something in their hearts might soften. For 3 days, I allowed myself to hope that my gesture might reach whatever love remained beneath their hardened hearts. Then I saw Brenda's social media post, and my world shattered completely. The photograph showed my carefully crafted album torn into pieces, its pages scattered across what looked like a garbage can. The photos I had chosen so carefully, images of Andrew's childhood, wonder of Lisa's past, openness of our family's shared joy in discovery, had been deliberately destroyed and discarded like trash. The caption read, "Cleaning out the clutter." Some people just can't let go of the past and keep trying to manipulate others with old memories. Time to move forward from negativity and desperate guilt trips. Toxic family, moving on, healthy boundaries. Seeing those irreplaceable memories, those moments of pure love and connection destroyed and thrown away like garbage was more than my heart could bear. I sank to my kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the full weight of their cruelty crashed over me. The realization that my own family had not only rejected my plea for understanding, but had actively participated in this ultimate act of erasure was devastating beyond words. Andrew's response was swift and merciless. Within hours of Brenda's post, my phone buzzed with a text message that was crueler than anything Lisa had ever said aloud. "Consider this closed, Mom. Don't contact us again. Ever. You're causing too much trouble with your obsession with political correctness and foreign cultures. We're done." But even that wasn't enough for Lisa. She began calling mutual friends and distant relatives, spreading a carefully crafted narrative that painted me as mentally unstable and dangerously fixated on forcing multiculturalism on family members who just wanted to live normal American lives. The cruelest blow of all came when I saw a video that Ethan and Chloe had posted on social media, clearly encouraged by their parents. In it, my beloved grandchildren laughed as they threw away items from my house that I had given them over the years: a small drum from Ghana, a beautiful scarf from India, a carved wooden elephant from Thailand. "Grandma's so weird with all her foreign stuff," Ethan said to the camera, his voice dripping with teenage contempt. "Like, why can't she just be normal? This junk is so primitive and embarrassing." Chloe giggled as she held up a delicate piece of pottery I had brought back from a research trip to Peru. "Yeah, Grandma, your culture obsession is so cringe. Why don't you just give up and let us be a normal family?" Watching my grandchildren casually destroy gifts that represented years of love and careful thought, hearing them dismiss my life's work as primitive junk, was a pain beyond anything I had ever experienced. These children I had loved unconditionally, whose minds I had tried to open to the beauty of human diversity, had been turned into weapons against everything I held sacred. It was then, in my darkest hour, that I finally revealed the most devastating secret of my past to Dr. Sarah Chen, the family therapist who had become my lifeline during this nightmare. The weight of keeping this burden alone had become unbearable, and Sarah's compassionate, non-judgmental presence finally gave me the courage to speak the truth I had hidden for over 20 years. There's something about Andrew's past that makes Lisa's current behavior even more heartbreaking. I began my voice barely above a whisper. Something I've never told anyone, something I promised myself I would take to my grave to protect him. Sarah waited patiently as I gathered the courage to continue her gentle presence, giving me the strength to finally break the silence that had protected my family's reputation for so long. When Andrew was 19, he was involved in a terrible car accident. He had been drinking at a party, something I didn't know at the time, and he was driving 3 of his friends home. One of them, a sweet boy named Carlos from El Salvador, was killed when Andrew lost control of the car. The words came out in a rush, decades of suppressed guilt and pain finally finding voice. Andrew wasn't just drunk, he was angry. Earlier that evening, he had gotten into an argument with Carlos about immigration policy, saying horrible things about people who came to America without earning their place. Carlos had defended his family's story, and Andrew had stormed off furious and humiliated. Sarah's face remained carefully neutral, but I could see the understanding dawning in her eyes as the full implications of what I was telling her became clear. The police investigation could have destroyed Andrew's entire future. I continued, tears streaming down my face. A DUI vehicular homicide charge, especially with evidence of racial animosity as a contributing factor, would have meant prison time and a lifetime of carrying the weight of having killed someone out of hatred and ignorance. I told Sarah about the phone calls I had made, the connections I had leveraged the substantial bribes I had paid to ensure that certain evidence never made it into the official report. I described how I had used my professional reputation and my network of contacts to create a narrative of tragic accident rather than criminal negligence. I spent over $100,000 and compromised every ethical principle I had ever held sacred to protect Andrew from the consequences of his choices, I whispered. I told myself I was saving an essentially good young man from one terrible mistake, giving him a chance to learn and grow and become better. The cosmic irony was unbearable. Andrew's current passive acceptance of Lisa's prejudice against Maria, his willingness to abandon me rather than stand up for tolerance and understanding, represented the complete betrayal of everything I had sacrificed to give him the chance to become. I buried the truth about Carlos's death so deep that Andrew himself probably doesn't remember the hatred that led to it, I concluded. And now, watching him allow his wife to attack an innocent woman for the crime of being different, I realized that my sacrifice didn't save him at all. It just enabled him to avoid learning the lessons that Carlos's death should have taught him. The silence in Sarah's office was profound, as the weight of my confession settled between us. I had protected my son from justice, compromised my own integrity, and spent my life savings to give him a second chance at becoming a man of compassion and understanding. Instead, I had enabled him to become someone who could stand by silently while his wife tortured an innocent woman for the crime of loving him despite her foreign accent and unfamiliar customs. The betrayal was complete, the irony devastating, and the price of my maternal love higher than I had ever imagined it could be. But for the first time in months, I also felt something else, a cold, determined clarity about what needed to happen next. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. Some truths are too important to remain buried. And some fights for human dignity are worth having no matter what they cost or who gets hurt in the process. The real battle for my family's soul was about to begin. In the weeks that followed the legal banishment and the revelation of my devastating secret to Dr. Chen, I found myself trapped in a psychological prison more terrifying than any physical confinement I could have imagined. The weight of Andrew's buried past, combined with the legal prohibition against contacting my own family, created a suffocating isolation that pressed down on me like a living nightmare. Every morning, I would wake up in my small apartment and remember anew that I was utterly alone with the truth, the monumental secret of Carlos's death, and my massive sacrifice to protect Andrew burned inside me like acid eating away at my sense of reality and purpose. For 40 years, I had been a scholar of human cultures, someone who helped others understand the beauty of diversity and the dangers of prejudice. Now, I was drowning in the most profound moral crisis of my life, watching my own family embody everything I had spent my career fighting against. The isolation was made infinitely worse by the systematic campaign that Brenda and Mr. Anderson launched to destroy not just my family relationships, but my entire professional legacy as well. What I didn't realize at first was how methodically they were working to obliterate every aspect of my identity and credibility. Mr. Anderson began what he called a wellness check on my mental state, subtly contacting anthropology associations and cultural studies programs with carefully crafted concerns about my declining cognitive abilities. He painted a picture of a once respected scholar who was now experiencing severe mental deterioration, someone who had developed unstable theories about cultural relativism and was no longer capable of distinguishing between academic objectivity and personal bias. Dr. Martinez has been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, he would say in his professional concerned tone. Her family has been forced to seek legal protection due to her obsessive fixation on forcing multicultural ideology on unwilling participants. There are serious questions about her ability to maintain the ethical standards required for academic participation. The impact was swift and devastating. Quietly, without any formal announcement, I began receiving polite but firm cancellations from cultural organizations where I had been scheduled to speak. Professional journals stopped including me in their correspondence. A symposium on cultural integration that had been planning to honor my lifetime achievements suddenly found scheduling conflicts that made my participation impossible. My reputation for intellectual rigor and ethical scholarship, built over 4 decades of careful research and principled advocacy, was being systematically obliterated. Colleagues who had once sought my expertise now avoided my calls. The university where I had taught with distinction for 30 years treated me like a pariah, as if my very presence might contaminate their reputation for academic objectivity. The financial consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The escalating legal fees from defending myself against the defamation lawsuit and fighting the restraining order completely drained my modest savings account. When Andrew reported suspicious activity in my financial accounts to protect me from myself, my bank accounts were frozen pending investigation into my supposed mental incompetence. The eviction notice came on a gray Tuesday in February. I stared at the legal document, written in the same cold clinical language as the restraining order, and realized that I was about to lose the last physical connection to my independent life. Within 30 days, my cherished home filled with artifacts from around the world and the accumulated treasures of a lifetime dedicated to understanding human diversity would be sold at public auction to cover my legal debts. The day of the auction was the most humiliating experience of my 66 years. I stood across the street watching strangers rifle through my possessions, putting price tags on items that held immeasurable personal and cultural value. The Balinese masks I had been given by village elders, the Peruvian textiles that had taken months to obtain ethically, the African sculptures that represented years of building trust with indigenous communities. Everything was reduced to lots and dollar amounts sold to the highest bidder. I ended up in a crowded, impersonal public shelter, sleeping on a narrow cot, surrounded by people whose circumstances had stripped them of dignity, just as mine had been stripped from me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I, who had spent my life advocating for the marginalized and displaced, was now among them. But the cruelest blow was yet to come, and it involved the 2 people I loved most in the world, my grandchildren, Ethan and Chloe. Andrew and Lisa, with Brenda's calculating guidance, decided to leverage my grandchildren in what they called a cultural heritage preservation campaign. They connected with a well-funded local organization that promoted traditional American values and authentic cultural preservation. I learned about it the same way the rest of the world did, through a professionally produced video that went viral on social media. The setting was beautiful, a patriotic display with flags and traditional symbols, perfect lighting, and soaring orchestral music. Ethan, now 17, and looking heartbreakingly like his grandfather, stood at a podium delivering a rehearsed speech about preserving our true heritage and avoiding the confusion of foreign influences. Sometimes, he said, looking directly into the camera with Andrew's eyes, we have to protect our authentic culture from those who would dilute it with outside ideas. Sometimes the most patriotic thing we can do is say no to people who want to change what makes America special. The words were clearly not his own, but hearing them in his voice, seeing him used as a puppet to legitimize his family's betrayal of everything I had tried to teach him, shattered something fundamental inside me. Chloe's contribution was even more devastating in its calculated innocence. The 15-year-old I had taken to museums and cultural festivals, the little girl who had once been fascinated by stories of faraway places, stood beside a drawing she had made of a happy, homogeneous family. The picture showed Andrew, Lisa, Brenda, Ethan, and herself all smiling and holding hands under an American flag. I was nowhere to be found. "This is what real family looks like," she said, her voice sweet and guileless. "When everyone shares the same values and traditions, and we don't let outsiders confuse us about who we really are." The video ended with a message about the importance of protecting authentic American culture from globalist influences and the dangers of allowing elderly relatives to impose outdated multicultural ideologies on younger generations. My own grandchildren had been turned into weapons against me, their innocent faces used to legitimize a narrative that painted my life's work as dangerous and subversive. I spent that night on my narrow shelter cot staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was how people lost their minds. The psychological torture of being legally separated from my family while watching them use my most precious relationships against me was almost unbearable. But just when I thought I had reached the bottom of despair, an unexpected lifeline appeared. The letter arrived at the shelter forwarded from my old address. It was from Dr. Rosa Delgado, a former student I had mentored nearly 25 years ago when she was struggling through her doctoral dissertation on cultural integration in American communities. She was now a nationally recognized leader in diversity and inclusion, and she had seen the viral video of my grandchildren. "Professor Martinez," she wrote, "I don't know what's happening in your family situation, but I know your character and your contributions to the field. The woman who guided me through the most challenging period of my academic life, who taught me that cultural understanding is not just academic theory, but a fundamental requirement for human dignity, could never be the person they're describing in the media." She included a check for $15,000 and the contact information for a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder abuse and cultural defamation cases. "These people understand the intersection of family manipulation and ideological persecution," she wrote. "Let them help you fight for the truth." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the fierce determination that had carried me through 40 years of academic challenges and cultural battles. I was not going to let my family's hatred destroy everything I had worked for, everything I believed in, everything that made life worth living. The war was far from over, but I finally had allies who understood what was really at stake. This wasn't just about family relationships or cultural preferences. This was about the fundamental question of whether truth and human dignity could survive when confronted by organized hatred and systematic deception. The next phase of Andrew and Lisa's campaign against me was so audacious, so perfectly calculated to destroy everything I held sacred, that I might have admired its thoroughness if it hadn't been aimed at obliterating my life's work and legacy. Using Andrew's social standing in the business community and a network of cultural figures whose ethics had been compromised by financial interests and political ideology, Lisa orchestrated something truly diabolical, a highly publicized national gala called Cultural Purity and American Tradition. The event was scheduled to take place at the very university where I had taught for 30 years, in the auditorium, where I had delivered countless lectures on the beauty and necessity of cultural diversity. The gala claimed to address the growing problem of cultural dilution in American families, particularly involving elderly relatives who might be suffering from globalist indoctrination that made them unable to appreciate authentic American values. Andrew was announced as the keynote speaker billed as a case study expert in protecting family heritage and navigating ideological challenges in cultural preservation. When Dr. Delgado learned about the gala through her contacts in academic circles, I felt physically ill. Lisa and Andrew were using my own professional arena, my own expertise as the stage for my public execution. They were turning the very university where I had taught students to appreciate human diversity into a platform for promoting the opposite message. I managed to watch the live stream from a computer at the public library, sitting in a corner where the other patrons couldn't see the tears streaming down my face. Andrew took the stage looking distinguished and confident, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I had spent on food in 3 months. His presentation was a masterpiece of manipulation. Without ever mentioning my name directly, he told the story of an elderly academic whose obsession with cultural relativism had made it impossible for her to accept that some cultural values were simply superior to others. He described how this woman's beautiful but dangerous ideology had nearly destroyed a loving family's ability to maintain their authentic heritage and values. Sometimes, Andrew said, his voice carrying the perfect tone of sad wisdom, our academic training becomes a prison. We become so attached to abstract theories of cultural equality that we lose sight of the practical realities of protecting what makes our civilization great. This particular case study shows how dangerous it can be when someone confuses multicultural ideology with genuine scholarship. The audience of heritage preservation advocates, traditional values, organizations, and cultural purity groups nodded knowingly. Here was a man who understood the real world, who could see past the ivory tower delusions that trapped lesser minds. But the knife twisted deeper when Lisa took the stage for a panel discussion on family dynamics and cultural preservation. She spoke about me with the practiced sympathy of someone who had rehearsed this performance many times. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you care about become increasingly disconnected from their own heritage, she said, her voice heavy with false concern. Gloria's theories were always interesting in an academic setting, but as she's gotten older, they've become more and more rigid. She simply cannot accept that cultural boundaries exist for good reasons, that not all traditions are equally valid or beneficial. The moderator asked gentle leading questions about the challenges of dealing with elderly relatives who might be experiencing ideological confusion. Lisa painted a picture of a family torn apart by one person's inability to accept reality, a tragic story of academic brilliance curdling into dangerous extremism. But the most devastating moment came when they showed a pre-recorded video featuring Ethan, now 17, and clearly uncomfortable, but going through with his scripted lines anyway. My beloved grandson, the boy I had taught to appreciate the richness of human diversity, spoke about his growing understanding of cultural authenticity and the importance of preserving our roots instead of embracing everything foreign. My grandmother taught me about different cultures. He said, his voice carefully neutral. But I've learned that appreciation doesn't mean we have to accept that everything is equally good. Some traditions are better than others, and it's okay to say that. Real diversity means respecting the cultures that built our country, not trying to replace them with foreign ideas. The implicit message was clear. Gloria's principles were naive academic theory, disconnected from the practical realities of maintaining cultural integrity. Even her own grandson had outgrown her dangerous idealism. The final twist of the knife came in a short video clip featuring Chloe, now 15, and giggling as she pointed at one of my old anthropology textbooks. "Grandma used to make us read this stuff," she said, laughing. "So old-fashioned, we prefer pure culture now, not all this mixing and confusion." The audience chuckled appreciatively. Here was the next generation freed from the dangerous thinking that had trapped their elder, ready to embrace more authentic approaches to cultural preservation. I sat in that library chair, watching my life's work being systematically dismantled and used as a cautionary tale about the dangers of multicultural ideology. The irony was unbearable. Andrew and Lisa, a family whose very existence had been saved by my willingness to compromise my own ethical principles, were being celebrated as champions of cultural purity and traditional values. But just as I was about to close the laptop and flee from this nightmare, something unexpected happened. The camera panned across the audience, and I caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Dr. James Morrison, a retired anthropologist who had been my colleague and friend for over 20 years. Dr. Morrison looked disgusted. His face showed the same expression of revulsion I remembered from faculty meetings when someone would propose compromising academic integrity for political or financial gain. He was shaking his head clearly, seeing through the elaborate performance being staged on that platform. After the gala ended, I received an email that gave me the first real hope I had felt in weeks. Dr. Morrison had tracked down my contact information through Dr. Delgado and reached out to express his outrage at what he had witnessed. "Gloria," he wrote, "what I saw tonight was an abomination. Whoever orchestrated that event has turned academic discourse into a weapon against truth and human dignity. I don't know the details of your family situation, but I know your character, and I know when I'm watching a witch trial dressed up as cultural advocacy." He offered something precious, a professional affidavit vouching for my impeccable academic judgment and mental acuity based on decades of professional collaboration. More importantly, he put me in touch with my retired family court judge ally, sharing his suspicions that something much darker was happening behind the scenes. Dr. Morrison had been quietly investigating the funding sources for the Cultural Purity and American Tradition Gala, and what he had discovered was disturbing. The event had been financially backed by several organizations with documented histories of promoting racial and cultural supremacy groups that used academic-sounding language to disguise fundamentally hateful ideologies. "Your family isn't just attacking you personally, Gloria," he wrote. "They've allied themselves with people who represent everything you've spent your career fighting against. This isn't about family dynamics anymore. This is about the fundamental question of whether hatred can disguise itself as scholarship and get away with it. The fight for my principles, my reputation, and my family's integrity had just gained a powerful new dimension. The truth was finally beginning to find champions who could help me expose the elaborate network of deception and hatred that had consumed my life. The final financial assault came with the precision of a military operation coordinated across multiple fronts to ensure my complete destruction. Lisa, with Andrew's full support and Brenda's strategic guidance, launched what she called her comprehensive solution, a devastating legal and financial attack designed to render me not just homeless, but utterly powerless to continue fighting for the truth. The lawsuit arrived like a thunderbolt, so massive in scope that even my battle-hardened legal allies were stunned by its audacity. Lisa filed a $750,000 claim against me for emotional distress. intentional damage to family reputation, and cultural harassment stemming from what she characterized as my prolonged campaign of ideological terrorism against their family's values and traditions. The legal documents crafted by Mr. Anderson with surgical precision painted me as a vindictive old woman who had orchestrated a systematic campaign of psychological manipulation against her own family. They cited my obsessive fixation on multiculturalism, my delusional insistence on cultural relativism, and my manipulative attempts to impose foreign ideologies on unwilling family members. But the lawsuit was only the beginning. While I was scrambling to find legal representation I couldn't afford, Lisa launched a parallel attack on my remaining professional standing and financial security. She contacted my former university's administration and various academic associations with what she called grave concerns about my mental competence and my fitness to manage my own financial affairs. Her evidence was compelling to anyone who didn't know the full story. She presented the restraining order as proof of my dangerous instability. She shared carefully edited recordings of our conversations that made my desperate pleas for tolerance sound like the rambling threats of an unhinged person. She even provided testimony from Andrew about their growing concerns over my increasingly paranoid behavior and my inability to distinguish between academic theory and personal reality. Dr. Martinez has become fixated on the idea that cultural differences should be celebrated rather than managed, Lisa told the University Review Board. She's lost the ability to maintain appropriate professional boundaries, and her family is genuinely concerned about her capacity to make sound financial decisions. The result was swift and devastating. The university's pension board, citing concerns about potential liability and maintaining institutional integrity, voted to permanently revoke my retirement benefits. They characterized their decision as protecting the institution from association with someone who had been legally determined to be a threat to her own family and whose academic judgment had been called into serious question. My professional honors, accumulated over 4 decades of distinguished service, were quietly stripped away under a clause about conduct inconsistent with university values. The anthropology department removed my name from their list of emeritus faculty, erasing 40 years of contributions to human understanding as if I had never existed. Within 2 months, I went from having a modest but secure retirement income to being completely destitute. The legal fees from defending against Lisa's massive lawsuit consumed the small emergency fund Dr. Delgado had helped me establish. The loss of my pension eliminated any hope of long-term financial stability. The eviction from my temporary shelter came on a bitter March morning, timed with cruel precision to ensure maximum humiliation. Brenda had somehow arranged for local media to be present ostensibly, covering a story about housing challenges for seniors with mental health issues. The footage that aired on the evening news showed me standing on the sidewalk with my few remaining possessions in garbage bags, a formerly respected professor reduced to visible homelessness. The reporter's voiceover was devastating. This is Dr. Gloria Martinez, a retired anthropology professor whose family disputes and legal troubles have led to housing instability. Local social services are working to provide support for seniors who may be struggling with the complex challenges of ideological conflicts and family estrangement. I watched myself on that television screen, standing in the cold with everything I owned in trash bags, and barely recognized the broken woman I had become. The dignified scholar who had once commanded respect in lecture halls and conference rooms had been transformed into a cautionary tale about what happens when elderly academics become radicalized by their own theories. Andrew and Lisa's response to my homelessness was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire ordeal. When reporters asked Andrew about his mother's situation, he delivered a statement that Brenda had clearly crafted for maximum impact. "My mother is struggling with some difficult personal and ideological issues right now," he said, his voice heavy with practiced sadness. "We've tried to help her understand that her academic theories don't always translate to real family situations, but sometimes you have to accept that you can't change someone's mind. I have no legal or moral obligation to support someone who refuses to acknowledge the damage her extremist views have caused to our family." Lisa's response was even more calculated in its cruelty. She posted on social media about her incredibly busy schedule with her advocacy work for cultural preservation, subtly implying that my problems were self-created drama that she simply didn't have time to deal with. When she encountered me on the street near the shelter, she literally looked away and crossed to the other side, unable or unwilling to face the suffering she had helped create. But the cruelest twist of all came when Brenda decided to celebrate their victory with a gesture so audacious that it took my breath away. Using money that she and Andrew had obtained by manipulating my frozen savings accounts, my entire $200,000 retirement fund that had been deemed at risk due to my supposed mental incompetence, she made a highly publicized donation to establish a cultural heritage and family values center at the very university where I had taught. The dedication ceremony was covered by local media as a heartwarming story of young people giving back to their community. Brenda stood beside a gleaming plaque that bore Andrew's name as the primary benefactor, smiling for cameras as she spoke about the importance of preserving authentic cultural traditions and protecting families from divisive ideological influences. This center will help families navigate the difficult decisions that arise when academic theory conflicts with practical family values, she announced. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries against relatives who have become too radicalized to participate in healthy family relationships. The photographs were shared widely on social media, transforming my stolen legacy into a trophy celebrating their cultural integrity and family protection. They had taken my life savings, used it to destroy my reputation, and then turned it into a monument to their own righteousness. The physical toll of this relentless assault finally overwhelmed my body's ability to cope. One morning in late March, as I was walking from the shelter to the library, where I spent my days researching legal options I couldn't afford to pursue, my chest exploded with pain and the world went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital intensive care unit connected to machines that were apparently keeping me alive. The doctor, a kind woman about Lisa's age, explained that I had suffered a massive heart attack brought on by severe stress and malnutrition. My body, she said gently, had simply reached its breaking point. As I lay there in that hospital bed, floating in and out of consciousness, I experienced something that felt like a vivid dream, but somehow more real than my waking life. I was back in Guatemala, 30 years younger, working with an indigenous community whose sacred burial grounds were being threatened by developers who saw only profit in ancient traditions. In the dream, I remembered the courage it had taken to stand between those bulldozers and the sacred sites, the way I had risked my career and my safety to protect something irreplaceable from people who couldn't understand its value. I remembered the community elder who had taken my hands and said, "Sometimes the ancestors choose their defenders. Sometimes the fight chooses the fighter." When I fully regained consciousness, I understood with crystalline clarity what my subconscious was trying to tell me. This entire nightmare, this systematic destruction of my family and my life, was the ultimate test of everything I had spent 40 years believing in. Andrew's and Lisa's bigotry, Brenda's calculated cruelty, my grandchildren's manipulation, they represented the complete embodiment of the ignorance and hatred I had fought against my entire career. The memory of that moment in Guatemala ignited something fierce and unbreakable in my chest, something that the heart attack couldn't touch. I was going to fight back, not just for my own vindication or my family's redemption, but for the principles themselves. The truth was worth fighting for, even if it cost me everything I had left. From my hospital bed, slowly recovering from the heart attack that had nearly ended my fight before it truly began, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. The machines monitoring my vital signs beeped steadily as I dictated what I knew might be my final message to the world. With the help of Maria Santos, the compassionate nurse who had become my unlikely ally, I recorded a video that contained everything I had been legally prohibited from saying. In that raw emotional recording, I detailed Lisa's ruthless manipulation of cultural fears, Brenda's calculated exploitation of family relationships, and the systematic way they had weaponized prejudice against both Maria and me. I played the unedited audio recordings I had secretly made of Lisa's initial vicious attack on Maria, her explicit insults about immigrants and foreign cultures, and the disrespectful comments from Ethan and Chloe that revealed how thoroughly they had been indoctrinated with hatred. But most importantly, I spoke directly to Andrew, appealing to whatever conscience might still exist beneath the layers of fear and self-protection that had consumed him. I reminded him of the values his father had tried to instill in him, of the young man who had once been genuinely transformed by his exposure to different cultures and perspectives. Andrew, I said, looking directly into the camera with whatever strength I had left, I know you're listening to other voices now, but somewhere inside you, you remember who you really are. You remember the summer you spent volunteering at the refugee center, the way you cried when you heard those families' stories of persecution and loss. You remember telling me that you wanted to spend your life building bridges instead of walls. I was careful not to reveal the full details of Carlos's death or my massive sacrifice to protect Andrew from its consequences. That secret was still too dangerous, too potentially destructive. But I alluded subtly to his past struggles with accepting diversity, hoping to awaken some memory of the growth and transformation he had achieved. You've overcome prejudice before. I continued, tears streaming down my face. You've chosen love over fear, understanding over hatred. Please don't let them convince you that those choices were weakness. Please don't let them turn you back into someone you fought so hard not to be. Maria Santos, who had watched the entire recording with tears in her eyes, promised to personally deliver the message to Andrew's home. She was as invested in seeing justice done as I was, having witnessed firsthand the cruel campaign that had nearly killed me. But what we didn't know was that Brenda had systematically bribed several staff members at the hospital to monitor my communications and report back to her about my condition and activities. The orderly, who was supposed to deliver my message instead, handed it directly to Brenda, who intercepted it before Andrew could ever see it. What happened next was so coldly calculated, so perfectly evil in its sophistication, that it took my breath away, even after everything I had already endured. Brenda didn't simply destroy the recording. Instead, she took my raw emotional plea for truth, and twisted it into the final weapon against me. Using sophisticated digital editing software, she carefully manipulated the audio and video, altering the tone of my voice, splicing sentences together out of context, and adding ominous background noise that made my desperate appeals sound like the paranoid ravings of an unhinged mind. She cut my heartfelt reminders of Andrew's past growth in such a way that they sounded like threats and blackmail attempts. She altered the audio of my recordings to make them sound like me rehearsing fictional scenarios. Most devastating of all, she edited my direct appeal to Andrew's conscience to make it sound like I was trying to manipulate him with false guilt and emotional coercion. The doctored video was then sold to a prominent national news channel for a substantial sum, framed as exclusive footage that provided disturbing proof of my mental deterioration. The story ran with the headline, "Retired Professor's Delusional Hospital Rants Reveal Dangerous Family Obsession." The edited version painted me as a dying woman consumed by paranoid delusions, desperately trying to blackmail her own son and defame her family's reputation with elaborate conspiracy theories about cultural persecution. The network's expert commentator, a psychologist who had never met me, analyzed my obvious signs of cognitive decline and my textbook pattern of elder paranoia combined with academic extremism. When Andrew appeared on national television the next day for what was billed as an exclusive interview about dealing with a parent's mental illness, my heart shattered completely. My son, the boy I had raised to value truth above all else, sat in a professional studio and delivered a performance that Brenda had clearly orchestrated with surgical precision. "This is incredibly difficult for our family," he said, his voice heavy with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "My mother was once a brilliant woman, a respected scholar who taught me so much about understanding different perspectives. But watching her deteriorate like this, seeing her become consumed by these paranoid fantasies about cultural persecution and family conspiracies has been heartbreaking." The interviewer asked gentle, leading questions about the challenges of dealing with elderly relatives who might be experiencing ideological fixation combined with cognitive decline. Andrew spoke about the difficult decision to seek legal protection from my increasingly erratic behavior and the painful necessity of stepping back for the sake of his own family's safety and emotional well-being. The most devastating moment came when Ethan, now 17, and clearly uncomfortable, but following his scripted lines, appeared on camera beside his father. My beloved grandson, looking sad and worried, spoke about how much he loved me, but how frightening it had become to watch my mental state deteriorate. "I really hope Grandma can get the help she needs," he said, his voice carefully coached to sound both loving and concerned. "But right now, we just need to focus on protecting our family and moving forward in a healthy way." Lisa appeared in the same segment, offering subtle nods of agreement and looks of feigned sympathy, publicly reinforcing Andrew's narrative and making it clear that the entire family stood united against my delusions. Her presence eliminated any possibility that viewers might see Andrew's position as anything other than the consensus view of people who knew me best. The viral video and the television interviews created a perfect storm of public humiliation that reached millions of people. Social media exploded with commentary about the crazy professor who was tormenting her own family with multicultural extremism. The story became a cautionary tale about elder abuse from the other direction. What happens when aging academics become dangerous to their own families through ideological radicalization? But in my darkest hour, when it seemed that Brenda's manipulation had succeeded beyond even her wildest dreams, an unexpected champion emerged from the shadows. Dr. Morrison, my former colleague, who had been quietly investigating the situation since the Cultural Purity Gala, had been carefully analyzing the viral video with the same methodical approach he had once applied to academic research. His decades of experience with digital media and his intimate knowledge of my character had led him to some disturbing conclusions. Working with a team of technical experts, he had discovered irrefutable proof of the digital manipulation that had transformed my desperate plea for truth into evidence of my supposed mental illness. The metadata, the audio analysis, the video compression artifacts, everything pointed to sophisticated editing designed to distort my message beyond recognition. More importantly, his investigation into Andrew and Lisa's cultural heritage preservation activities had uncovered a pattern of financial fraud that extended far beyond my family's situation. They weren't just stealing from their own relatives. They were systematically defrauding multiple cultural organizations and elderly donors, using their newfound reputation as heritage protection experts to gain access to vulnerable victims. The evidence Dr. Morrison had compiled was substantial enough to interest federal investigators and powerful enough to finally give me the leverage I needed to fight back against the elaborate network of lies and hatred that had consumed my life. As I lay in that hospital bed, reading Dr. Morrison's preliminary findings on his laptop, I felt something I hadn't experienced in almost a year: hope. Not just for my own vindication, but for justice itself. The truth was finally beginning to surface, and those who had worked so hard to bury it were about to discover that some things cannot be destroyed, no matter how much power and money you throw at them. The real battle was just beginning, and this time I had an army of truth-tellers standing behind me. Dr. Morrison's evidence proved to be the key that unlocked everything. Within weeks of his preliminary findings reaching the right authorities, I found myself at the center of a legal earthquake that would reshape not only my family's future, but the entire national conversation about cultural prejudice and elder abuse in America. The funding for my legal battle came from an unexpected source, a long-forgotten anthropological research grant I had documented decades earlier, but never claimed money that had been sitting in a university foundation account earning interest for 25 years. The original $3,000 grant had grown to nearly $250,000 money I had completely forgotten about until Dr. Morrison's investigation uncovered it through his academic contacts. My legal team was formidable. Dr. Patricia Reyes, a retired cultural diversity consultant with a legendary reputation for exposing institutional prejudice. Dr. Michael Chen, a prominent family therapist who specialized in cases involving cultural manipulation of children, and Rebecca Martinez, an aggressive elder abuse attorney who had built her career on cases exactly like mine. Together, they launched a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit against Lisa, Andrew, and Brenda for fraud, elder abuse, cultural defamation, and the systematic psychological manipulation of my grandchildren. The case attracted global attention almost immediately. Here was a story that resonated with millions of families struggling with cultural conflicts, immigration tensions, and the complex dynamics of aging in an increasingly diverse America. Media outlets from around the world sent reporters to cover what was being called the cultural prejudice trial of the decade. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when the truth finally exploded into the light. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity with overflow seating for media and members of the public who had followed my story through the viral videos and international coverage. Cameras rolled as Judge Sarah Thompson called the session to order, and I felt my heart pounding as Rebecca Martinez approached the evidence table. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom, "we are about to present audio evidence that will demonstrate beyond any shadow of doubt the calculated nature of the cultural prejudice and elder abuse perpetrated against Dr. Gloria Martinez." The first recording was Lisa's voice captured during that devastating family gathering when I had been secretly documenting her attack with my professional dictation device, disguised as a decorative ornament I always carried. Her words filled the courtroom with chilling clarity. "Your accent is so thick I can barely understand you. What is that awful smell? You foreigners always try to take over everything with your weird food and customs." A gasp went through the courtroom, but Rebecca wasn't finished. The next recording was even more devastating. Lisa continuing her vicious assault on Maria. "What kind of low-class foreigner thinks she can just waltz into a respectable American family and change everything? You're probably just here for Andrew's money, like all the rest of them." But the most crushing blow came with the third recording. Andrew's voice weak and complicit, joining Lisa in planning their campaign against me. "I know, Lisa," Andrew's voice said clearly. "We need to be careful about how we handle Mom. If we can make it look like she's the problem, like she's becoming too radical with all her multicultural theories, people will side with us. We just need to coach Ethan and Chloe to stay on message." The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about spontaneous family conflict or cultural misunderstandings. This was a calculated conspiracy to destroy me, using my own grandchildren as weapons. When Andrew was called to testify, the man who took the witness stand bore little resemblance to the confident manipulator who had helped orchestrate this nightmare. Confronted with the undeniable evidence of his own words, his carefully constructed facade began to crumble in real time. "Mr. Martinez," Rebecca said calmly, "do you recognize the voice on these recordings discussing how to coach your children against their grandmother?" Andrew's hand shook as he gripped the witness stand. I was trying to protect my family," he whispered. "You don't understand the pressure we were under. Mom was becoming so extreme, so fixated on forcing her political views on everyone. I thought if we could just get her to see reason. So you admit that you conspired with your wife to systematically isolate your mother and manipulate your children's perceptions of her. I never meant for it to go this far." Andrew's voice broke completely. "I thought she would just back down, stop pushing her agenda on us. I never thought it would destroy everything." As the weight of his public confession settled over him, Andrew suffered what could only be described as a complete psychological collapse. He began sobbing uncontrollably, his body shaking so violently that the bailiff had to steady him in his chair. The sight of my son, the boy I had raised to appreciate human diversity, reduced to a broken, weeping figure, was both vindicating and heartbreaking. Lisa's turn came next, and her attempted defiance quickly crumbled under the weight of the evidence. When confronted with her own voice spewing hatred at an innocent woman, when forced to listen to her vicious words played back in front of the world, something fundamental broke inside her. "Mrs. Martinez," Rebecca continued, "do you maintain that calling someone a low-class foreigner was appropriate behavior for a family gathering? They were trying to change us." Lisa stammered, tears beginning to stream down her face. "I was protecting our traditions, our way of life. I never wanted..." But as the full scope of her cruelty was laid bare as she realized that her hatred had been broadcast to millions of people around the world. Lisa suffered her own devastating psychological collapse. She began hyperventilating, her face flushed with shame and terror, her carefully maintained image of respectability shattered beyond repair. Brenda's attempt to flee the courtroom only made her guilt more obvious. She was apprehended in the hallway by court security, her careful composure finally cracking as she realized that her role as the primary amplifier and enabler of this prejudice had been exposed. The woman who had helped spread rumors and coordinate attacks broke down in desperate tears, her social ambitions lying in ruins around her. Watching these three people who had systematically destroyed my life break down completely in front of the world was a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow. The truth had finally been revealed, justice was being served, but the cost to everyone involved was staggering. As I sat in that courtroom, listening to the evidence of their calculated cruelty being presented to the world, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years, complete vindication. Not just for myself, but for every principle I had ever stood, for every value I had tried to instill in my family, every belief I had held about the fundamental dignity and worth of all human beings. The silence in the courtroom was profound as the judge prepared to deliver her preliminary ruling. The world was watching, waiting to see if justice could still prevail in cases of cultural prejudice and family betrayal. And for the first time in almost 3 years, I allowed myself to hope that the answer might be yes. The court's verdict came down like the final judgment it truly was. Judge Thompson's voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority as she delivered her ruling, speaking not just to the defendants before her, but to a nation grappling with questions of cultural acceptance and family responsibility. This court finds the defendants guilty on all counts of criminal emotional abuse, cultural defamation, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and parental alienation, she announced. Mrs. Lisa Martinez, your systematic campaign of cultural prejudice and your manipulation of minor children represent a particularly heinous form of family abuse. You are sentenced to 7 years in federal prison with mandatory participation in cultural sensitivity and psychological counseling programs. Lisa, still broken from her courtroom collapse, could barely stand as the sentence was read. The woman who had launched this nightmare with such confident hatred was now facing the reality that her bigotry had cost her not just her freedom, but her entire future. Mr. Andrew Martinez. The judge continued, her voice heavy with disappointment. Your passive complicity in this abuse and your willingness to manipulate your own children to participate in the systematic destruction of their grandmother represents a betrayal of the most fundamental family obligations. You are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison with mandatory participation in psychological counseling and cultural education programs. Andrew's sentencing hit me harder than Lisa's had. Watching my son led away in handcuffs, seeing him turn back to mouth, "I'm sorry, Mom." One more time before disappearing through the courthouse doors was a pain that no amount of vindication could heal. Brenda received 2 years in prison and substantial financial penalties that would bankrupt her for life. Her dreams of social status and influence had crumbled into public disgrace and financial ruin. But perhaps more important than the prison sentences was Judge Thompson's formal statement, vindicating my character and explicitly dismantling the false narrative that had been constructed around my supposed extremism and mental decline. This court wishes to state unequivocally that Dr. Gloria Martinez's character has been completely vindicated, the judge declared. The evidence shows a woman of impeccable integrity and profound dedication to cultural understanding who was systematically victimized by those closest to her. The narrative of her ideological extremism was a calculated fabrication designed to facilitate abuse and manipulation. Dr. Martinez's lifelong commitment to diversity and human dignity is what ultimately brought this conspiracy to light. The formal restoration of my dignity felt almost as important as the financial restitution. For over 2 years, I had been painted as a radical academic whose theories had made her dangerous to her own family. Now the world knew the truth. I had been right all along to stand up for tolerance and human decency. In the weeks that followed the trial, the letters began arriving. The first came from Andrew, written from his prison cell in handwriting that shook with desperation and genuine remorse. "Mom," he wrote, "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I need you to understand what happened to me, how I became someone capable of participating in this nightmare. The therapy here is helping me see that my fear of being different, my terror of standing out or being judged, made me into a coward who would sacrifice anything, even you, to fit in and be accepted." He went on to describe the slow process of recognizing how Lisa's prejudices had infected his thinking, how her fears about cultural change had fed into his own insecurities about identity and belonging. I let her convince me that protecting our traditional family meant attacking anyone who challenged our narrow worldview. I forgot everything you taught me about the beauty of diversity, about the strength that comes from embracing differences rather than fearing them. The letter was raw, honest, and painful to read, but it also contained something I hadn't heard from Andrew in years: genuine remorse and a commitment to real change. Whether we would ever have a close relationship again remained to be seen. But I found some peace in knowing that he was finally confronting the fear and hatred that had consumed him. Lisa's fate was perhaps the most complete of all. Ostracized by what remained of our extended family and the community at large, she faced her prison sentence in complete isolation. Her calculated prejudices, her dreams of cultural purity, built on hatred of others, had crumbled into the bitter loneliness that such ideologies always produce. Brenda's downfall was equally thorough. Abandoned by her own family, who were horrified by her role in the conspiracy, she faced her future with no support system and no financial resources. The woman who had helped orchestrate so much of my suffering now lived in the kind of isolation she had tried to impose on me. But the most healing development was the gradual transformation I witnessed in my grandchildren. Ethan and Chloe, freed from their parents' toxic influence and enrolled in intensive therapy, began reaching out to me, tentatively asking questions about what had really happened and expressing their own confusion and growing understanding. "Grandma," Ethan said during one of our first real conversations after the trial, "I don't understand how Mom and Dad convinced me to say those horrible things about you and Maria. I know you're not crazy, and I've always known that. But somehow they made me feel like I had to choose sides, and I chose wrong." The healing process was slow and sometimes painful, but seeing the genuine love and remorse in their eyes gave me hope that the bonds Lisa and Andrew had tried to sever could eventually be repaired. Maria's response to the trial's outcome was perhaps the most beautiful surprise of all. Instead of being bitter about the treatment she had received, she approached me with grace and forgiveness, eager to build the kind of authentic relationship that had been impossible under the shadow of hatred and fear. "Dr. Martinez," she said, tears streaming down her face as we embraced after the verdict, "thank you for fighting not just for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been made to feel unwelcome. because of where they come from or how they speak. You showed me that there are families worth fighting for, people worth believing in. Our relationship blossomed into something deeper and more meaningful than I had ever imagined possible. Maria became not just Andrew's girlfriend, but my chosen daughter, my partner in the work of building bridges between cultures and healing the wounds that prejudice creates. The victory was complete but bittersweet. My principles had been vindicated, my reputation restored, my family relationships rebuilt on a foundation of truth rather than lies. But the cost had been enormous. My son was in prison, my grandchildren were traumatized, and years of my life had been consumed by a battle I never should have had to fight. Still, as I sat in my reclaimed home, surrounded by the artifacts and memories that represented a lifetime of cultural exploration and understanding, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years' peace. The truth had prevailed, justice had been served, and the people who loved me were finding their way back to the light. 3 years after the trial that changed everything, I wake each morning in my restored home with a sense of profound gratitude that still surprises me. The house that had once been a battlefield of cultural hatred and family manipulation has been transformed back into the sanctuary it was always meant to be. Every room has been carefully returned to its original warmth and dignity, filled once again with artifacts from around the world, books celebrating human diversity, and the countless small treasures that tell the story of a life dedicated to understanding and appreciating the beautiful complexity of human cultures. The restoration process had been both practical and deeply therapeutic. Each piece returned to its proper place, each book restored to its shelf, each photograph rehung on the wall represented not just the recovery of my material possessions, but the reconstruction of my identity and my sense of purpose in the world. My days now have a rhythm and meaning that brings me deep contentment. I've returned to my work as an educator and advocate, but in new and more personally fulfilling ways. 3 times a week, I host cultural exchange workshops in my home, bringing together people from different backgrounds to share their stories, their traditions, and their experiences of building lives in a diverse society. These gatherings have become the heartbeat of my new life. Maria often serves as my co-host, her natural warmth and her own journey from persecution to acceptance, making her an inspiring example for others who have faced similar challenges. Together, we've created a space where differences are celebrated rather than feared, where questions are welcomed rather than discouraged, where understanding grows through genuine connection rather than theoretical discussion. Maria's integration into my life and my community has been one of the most beautiful aspects of this healing journey. Our relationship has blossomed into something deeper and more authentic than traditional family bonds often achieve. She has become my closest companion, my partner in cultural advocacy, and the daughter I never had but always dreamed of having. Dr. Martinez, she told me recently as we prepared for one of our workshops, you saved more than just your own reputation when you fought that battle. You saved my faith in the possibility of belonging somewhere, of being accepted for who I am, rather than being judged for where I came from. We spend hours together exploring the city's cultural districts, visiting museums and festivals, interviewing recent immigrants for the book I'm writing about the ongoing challenges and triumphs of cultural integration in modern America. Our shared passion for understanding and celebrating human diversity has created a bond that's stronger than blood relationships built on obligation rather than genuine affection. The healing process with my grandchildren has been slower, but equally profound. Ethan and Chloe, now in college and freed from their parents' toxic influence, have become regular visitors to my home and enthusiastic participants in my cultural workshops. Their journey from manipulation and hatred to understanding and acceptance has been inspiring to witness. Grandma Chloe said during a recent visit, "I'm taking a class on immigration history, and I keep thinking about how wrong we were about Maria, about you, about everything. I want to understand how we got so confused, how we let fear make us into people we're not." Both of my grandchildren have expressed interest in studying anthropology and cultural studies, eager to understand their grandmother's work and to contribute to healing the divisions that nearly tore our family apart. Their presence at my workshops, asking thoughtful questions, and sharing their own experiences of recovering from prejudice adds a hopeful dimension to our gatherings that touches everyone who participates. Andrew's journey toward redemption continues from a distance, and our relationship remains complicated by the magnitude of what happened between us. His letters from prison arrive regularly, filled with genuine remorse and detailed accounts of his progress in therapy and cultural education programs. "Mom," he wrote in his most recent letter, "I'm learning that the fear I felt about cultural change was really fear about my own inadequacy, my own insecurity, about whether I was good enough, smart enough, strong enough to thrive in a diverse world. I chose hatred because it seemed easier than growth division, because it felt safer than understanding." While our relationship may never fully recover the closeness we once shared, I've found peace in knowing that he's genuinely working to become the man he was meant to be. Whether we'll ever have regular contact again remains to be seen, but his transformation gives me hope that even the deepest prejudices can be overcome with commitment and courage. Lisa and Brenda served their sentences in isolation, their hatred having destroyed not just my life for a time, but their own futures permanently. I feel no satisfaction in their suffering, only a kind of philosophical sadness about the way fear and prejudice ultimately consume those who embrace them. The most meaningful development in my new life has been my work as a national advocate for cultural understanding and family healing, using my story as a powerful example of both the devastation that prejudice can cause and the possibility of justice and recovery. I've spoken at conferences across the country, testified before congressional committees, and worked with legal organizations to strengthen protections for families facing cultural persecution. My memoir, Bridges Over Walls, An Anthropologist's Fight for Family and Truth, became a bestseller and has generated thousands of letters from readers who recognize their own struggles in my story. Many have found the courage to stand up to prejudice in their own families, armed with the knowledge that tolerance and understanding are worth fighting for, even when the cost seems unbearable. The cultural center I have established in my home has become a model for similar programs across the country. Families dealing with cultural conflicts, immigrants seeking support and understanding, and young people trying to bridge generational and cultural divides regularly participate in our workshops and support groups. My life is often filled with laughter now. Maria's voice in the kitchen as she teaches cooking classes, my grandchildren's animated discussions about their studies and their plans to make the world more inclusive, the gentle conversations of workshop participants as they share their stories and discover their common humanity. As I sit in my garden each evening watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, I often reflect on the journey that brought me to this place of peace and purpose. The pain of those dark years hasn't disappeared entirely. The scars of betrayal run deep, and I still sometimes wake in the night, remembering the terror of being homeless and abandoned by those I loved most. But I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the pain never existed. It means integrating the lessons of that pain into a life of greater wisdom, deeper compassion, and more authentic relationships. The woman who emerged from that crucible is stronger, more purposeful, and more at peace than the woman who entered it, though the cost of that transformation was almost unbearable. My life now is defined not by what was taken from me, but by what I chose to build from the wreckage. I have my principles, my dignity, my beautiful home, and most importantly, relationships based on mutual respect and shared values rather than fear and obligation. The victory was worth fighting for, even though the price was higher than I ever imagined it could be. Truth did prevail, justice was served, and a life of authentic purpose and meaningful connection proved to be possible no matter how dark the circumstances seemed. Years have passed since that devastating family gathering when Lisa first launched her vicious attack on Maria. And as I look back on the journey from that moment of initial shock to this place of profound peace, I'm struck by how completely my understanding of family strength and happiness has been transformed. My life today radiates an inner peace that was hard-won through the crucible of the most devastating betrayal imaginable. This house, once the epicenter of cultural hatred and family manipulation, has become a sanctuary filled with authentic joy and genuine diversity. The laughter of Maria and my grandchildren echoes through rooms that once felt like a prison of isolation and despair. Friends from my cultural workshops, colleagues from my advocacy work, and neighbors from our increasingly diverse community regularly gather around my dining room table, creating the kind of chosen family that's built on shared values rather than accidents of birth. I've become a nationally recognized voice in the fight against cultural prejudice and family abuse, my story serving as both a warning about the insidious nature of hatred disguised as tradition and a beacon of hope for those who find themselves trapped in similar nightmares. The memoir I wrote has touched thousands of lives, and the letters I receive from readers often tell me that my experience gave them the courage to stand up for their own principles when family members tried to exploit their love and loyalty. The greatest lesson I've learned through this ordeal is that my strength never lay in avoiding conflict or keeping peace at any cost, but in my willingness to courageously confront prejudice and fight for the dignity of all cultures and all people. I discovered that true family connections are those based on mutual respect and shared commitment to human decency, not blood relations or inherited obligations that demand the sacrifice of fundamental principles. I carry no bitterness toward those who betrayed me so completely. Andrew's weakness and Lisa's hatred were tragic flaws that destroyed their own lives far more completely than they ever harmed mine. Even Brenda's calculated cruelty ultimately served to clarify what really matters in life and what doesn't. Their choices revealed their character, while my response to their betrayal revealed mine. To anyone listening to my story who recognizes echoes of their own struggles with family prejudice, cultural conflict, or the profound loneliness that can come with standing up for what's right, I want you to know this truth really does prevail, even when the battle seems hopeless. Human dignity can be reclaimed even after the most devastating attacks. A life of purpose and authentic connection is always possible, no matter how complete the destruction may seem. The spirit of resilience that carried me through the darkest valley of my life continues to sustain me in these golden years of advocacy and authentic relationships. My commitment to cultural understanding, tested by the cruelest betrayals imaginable, emerged not just intact, but stronger and more precise than ever before. The principles I spent 40 years teaching and a lifetime trying to live by proved their worth when everything else was stripped away. Most importantly, I learned that happiness isn't about having the family you were born into accept you unconditionally, but about creating the life you can live with integrity and peace. The woman who sits in this garden today, surrounded by people who love her for who she really is, rather than what she might provide them, is more content and fulfilled than the woman who began this journey, believing that family loyalty was the highest virtue. Sometimes the most profound courage is found not in grand gestures, but in the quiet determination to keep believing in human goodness when everyone around you has chosen the easier path of fear and hatred. Sometimes the greatest victory is not in defeating your enemies, but in refusing to become like them, no matter how much they take from you. I am 70 now, and I have never been more certain that love, understanding, and respect for human diversity will always triumph over prejudice and hatred, no matter how deeply entrenched those dark forces may seem. The truth is, worth fighting for dignity is worth defending, and hope is always justified, even in the darkest hours of human conflict.